Good evening, friends, and welcome to the series on the first age of Middle-earth. The night is deep, and the world is asleep. Now is the best time to listen to tales of old. Please, relax, and let my voice guide you through the mists of time, back to an age more distant than any legend, back to the world of Tolkien's creation, Arda, as it was in its beginning. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, smash, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Also, please let me know in the comments what city you're in and what time it is there, so I know which corner of the world my voice is keeping company with tonight. Now, dim the lights and let us enter tonight's story with the sound of the bells. In the first age of Arda, the world was still a realm of chaos and tumult. The Valar, those great Ainur, descended from the timeless halls, intending to manifest the vision that Ilúvatar had foreshadowed in the great music. However, their work was thwarted from the very beginning. Melkor, the most powerful of the Ainur, also descended, but he came not with a desire to co-create, but with an ambition to possess. He claimed Arda as his own kingdom and wantonly ruined the creations of the Valar. When the Valar built lands, Melkor destroyed them. When they delved valleys, he raised them up. When they carved mountains, he cast them down. And when they hollowed out the seas, he spilled them. Thus, the primeval world trembled in a great struggle of shaping and unshaping. Fire and darkness were Melkor's chief weapons. He kindled great fires, filling the young earth with flame. After a long struggle, a new Vala arrived, the mighty Tulkas, whose valor finally drove Melkor temporarily beyond the confines of Arda into the dark void of the outer regions. With Melkor's retreat, the Valar finally had a precious moment of respite. They quelled the fires Melkor had lit, burying them deep beneath the nascent mountains, and began to bring order to the traumatized world. During this period, Arda was shrouded in a dim twilight, a light that came from the stars, which Varda, the queen of the Valar and lady of the stars, had made in an even more ancient time. But this starlight was faint and distant, insufficient to awaken slumbering life. At this time, Yavanna, the Vala who was the master of all things that grow, was finally able to sow the seeds of life she had long conceived. However, these seeds required a more potent energy than starlight to sprout and flourish. She expressed this need for light to the other Valar, and this became the direct impetus for shaping the next stage of the world. The Valar understood that for Arda to truly flourish, and to welcome the coming of the firstborn children of Ilúvatar, the elves, they must create a more powerful light source to spread the radiance of order and life across the land. In answer to Yavanna's plea, Ole, the master of earth, and Craft, the great smith among the Valar, began one of his most magnificent works, the collaborative forging of the two lamps. Ole was a natural creator, his heart set on shaping the substances of Arda into things of beauty and use. He set to work forging two colossal lamps, with a craft so exquisite and a scale so grand that they far surpassed anything mortal hands could ever hope to achieve in later ages. However, this was not the work of Ole alone. The creation of the two lamps was a perfect collaboration of power and wisdom among the Valar. After Uli had completed the forging of the vessels, Varda, the queen of the stars, and the Vala, with the deepest understanding of light, filled them with the light she had gathered from the mists that shrouded Arda. infusing the lamps with brilliant energy. Then, Manwe, king of the Valar and lord of Arda, hallowed the lamps with his authority, bestowing upon them a sacred status and purpose. This ancient history records their collaboration thus. Then Alle, at the prayer of Yavanna, made 2 mighty lamps for the lighting of the Middle Earth, which he had built amid the encircling seas. Then Varda filled the lamps, and Manwe hallowed them, and the Valar set them upon high pillars, more lofty far than are any mountains of the later days. To raise these 2 mighty lamps high above the world, all also forged 2 immense pillars of stone, their height far exceeding any mountain of later ages. One pillar was erected in the far north of Middle-earth, named Helkar. The other stood in the far south, named Ringul. The Valar placed 1 lamp atop Helkar in the north, naming it Illuin, meaning sky blue, and its light shone with a cool blue hue. The other lamp was placed atop Ringul in the south and named Ormal, meaning high gold, and its radiance was a warm, golden light. The blue light of Illuin flowed southwards, and the golden light of Ormal spread northwards, the 2 mingling and blending at the center of Middle-earth. These 2 hues of light, much like the silver and gold of the 2 trees of Valinor in a later age, prefigured a profound pattern of duality in the history of Arda's light. This was not mere illumination, but a sacred, collective act of creation that combined the power of craft, all, light, Varda, and authority, Manwe, aimed at transforming a world of chaos into an orderly, stable, and potential-filled abode. As the 2 lamps were raised on high, Arda experienced its first day. It was an unprecedented sight, as the ancient records say. The light of the lamps of the Valar flowed out over the earth, so that all was lit, as it were, in a changeless day. The nature of this light was constant and static. Unlike the later sun and moon, it did not rise or set. Unlike the 2 trees, it did not wax and wane. It was an eternal, unchanging illumination that created a perfect world with no night, no shadows, and no sense of time's passage. Under this light, the initial form of Arda exhibited a perfect symmetry. The world at that time was a single disc-shaped continent, not yet divided into east and west by vast oceans. At the continent's center was a great lake, and in that lake was an island, which was the first home of the Valar. The blue light of Illuin and the golden light of Ormal mingled in the central region of Middle-earth, creating a land where the light was softest and its power most abundant. Here, the seed sown by Yavanna sprouted swiftly and grew strong, and life flourished at an unprecedented rate. This constant and symmetrical light shaped a geometrically perfect, idealized world. It represented the Valar's initial blueprint, a state without flaws, without disorder, where everything existed in harmonious balance. This perfection was both a manifestation of their power and a faithful interpretation of the beautiful themes in Ilúvatar's music. However, this static, engineered perfection also concealed an inherent fragility. It lacked the capacity for change and adaptation. Once the pillars upon which it depended were attacked, the entire system was doomed to collapse. This first age of light, though brilliant, thus laid the groundwork for a more turbulent and tragic future. In the narrative of Arda's creation, the 2 great pillars, Helkar and Ringil, signified far more than mere physical supports. They were powerful archetypal symbols, representing the imposition of order upon chaos and the establishment of physical and metaphysical boundaries for a nascent world. To understand their deeper meaning, one can compare them to similar images in ancient human mythology. The most striking parallel is the Pillars of Hercules from ancient Greek mythology. These two pillars, standing on either side of the Strait of Gibraltar, marked the edge of the known world in the ancient worldview. They were the boundary of civilization and order. Beyond lay the unknown, dangerous realm of chaos. Renaissance tradition even inscribed them with the motto, Ne plus ultra, meaning nothing further beyond, or not to be surpassed. This maxim perfectly captures the essence of a boundary. It is both a warning and a definition. The act of the Valar in raising Melkor and Ringul was precisely such an act of definition. They separated Arda from the primordial chaos caused by Melkor, using the two pillars to define the limits of the cosmos, the ordered world, temporarily shutting out disorder and evil. This realm of light was the safe zone that the Valar understood and controlled, while the distant north beyond the pillars, where the light was faintest, was the dark corner Melkor chose for his lurking. Besides serving as boundaries, pillars in many cultures also symbolize stability, strength, and divine presence. In the Judeo-Christian tradition, the two famous bronze pillars at the entrance to Solomon's temple, Jachin and Boaz, meant he shall establish, and in it is strength. They were not structural supports, but symbols of the covenant between God and the people of Israel, representing divine establishment and eternal support. Similarly, in the book of Exodus, the pillar of cloud and the pillar of fire that guided the Israelites through the wilderness were direct manifestations of God's presence and guidance. From this perspective, Melkor and Ringul were also the Jachin and Boaz of Arda. They were a declaration of the Valar's divine authority and a physical embodiment of their power to maintain the world's order. The light that flowed down from the pillars, like the guiding pillar of cloud and fire, directed the growth of all Yavanna's creations, ensuring that life flourished under a divine order. Combining these two symbolic meanings leads to a deeper understanding. The creation of the two lamps and their pillars was the Valar's attempt to construct a perfectly engineered paradise. This was a creative philosophy based on reason, symmetry, and absolute control. The ultimate expression of the thought of Ul, the smith god. They attempted to solve the problem of light and order once and for all through a single magnificent engineering project, thereby creating a changeless day. However, this model, based on a man-made or God-made static perfection, stands in sharp contrast to the two trees of Valinor, which were later created under the guidance of Yavanna. The two trees were living, organic beings whose light followed a natural rhythm of growth, flowering and waning, creating a rhythmic alternation of light and dark. This cyclical pattern in itself contained the concepts of change, death, and rebirth, a dynamic equilibrium. In comparison, the constant light of the lamps, though glorious, lacked the resilience of life. It was a closed, rigid system that, once broken by an external force, could not repair itself, and its destruction was necessarily catastrophic and absolute. Therefore, the era of the lamps can be seen as the Valar's first design draft for the world. This draft was ambitious, filled with a yearning for perfect order, but it was ultimately fragile. Its failure was not only a tragedy caused by Melkor's malice, but also revealed a deeper cosmic law. A truly enduring creation may not require static perfection, but rather the organic resilience that can accommodate change and self-repair. This theme would echo throughout later history, especially in the tragic desire of the elves to halt decay and freeze time with their rings of power. At the mingling of the light of the two lamps, in the very center of Middle-earth's vast expanse, there was a great lake. In the heart of the lake lay a green and pleasant isle named Almoren. This was the first home of the Valar in Arda, a paradise where they rested after their labors. When all the world was young, and the new greenness was still a marvel in the eyes of its makers, the Isle of Almoren was the center of that marvel. Here, the blue light of Illuin and the golden light of Ormal blended to create a unique and harmonious radiance, causing all things on the island to grow more lush and beautiful than anywhere else. There was no scorching heat or biting cold, only an eternal gentleness. The Valar established their dwellings here, surrounded by palaces and gardens, with all in perfect harmony. During this period, the Valar were content and at peace. They had completed the initial shaping of the world, temporarily banished the threat of darkness, and the creation before them was filled with hope and beauty. To celebrate the completion of this great work and the dawn of a new age, Manwe, king of the Valar, held a great feast on the Isle of Almoren. All the Valar paused from their labors and gathered there. At this joyous celebration occurred the only wedding of the Valar within the world of Arda. The mighty Tulkas married Nessa, the dancer and sister of Orome. This union was itself a reflection of the peace and happiness of that era, symbolizing the joining of strength and grace, and marking the Valar's complete acceptance and love for the perfect home they had created. Ancient lore describes their dwelling and state of mind at that time. And the first home of the Valar was upon the Isle of Almoren in the Great Lake. When all the world was young and the new greenness was a marvel to its makers, and they were long content. The Isle of Almoren was not only a geographical center but also a symbolic axis mundi. It was the focal point of divine power, the source of order and harmony. The Valar dwelt there, and their very presence infused the young world with stability and sacred energy. This island, together with the lake surrounding it, formed a perfect mandala pattern, a cosmic model radiating from a sacred center. It represented a complete, self-sufficient, ideal world in communion with the divine. As the light of the two lamps shone steadily upon the earth, a long age known as the Spring of Arda began. This period of peace was not fleeting. According to the reckoning of the Valar, it lasted for 1,600 Valian years, which translates to roughly 15,000 solar years of later ages. During this long, almost eternal spring, the creative power of Yavanna was fully realized. Upon the earth, the symphony of life began to play. Ancient accounts describe the scene with poetic strokes, and the seeds that Yavanna had sown began now to sprout and grow. And there arose a multitude of things, great and small, that sprouted from the earth, mosses and grasses, and great ferns, and trees whose tops were crowned with cloud as they were living mountains, but whose feet were wrapped in a green twilight. And beasts came forth and dwelt in the grassy plains, and in the rivers and the lakes, or walked in the shadows of the woods. As yet no flower had bloomed, nor any bird had sung, for these things still awaited their time in the bosom of Yavanna. But the richness of her imagining was already there, and it was richer far in the middle of the earth, where the light of the lamps was mingled and was strongest. This description reveals several key features of the Spring of Arda. First, the explosive growth and diversity of life. From the tiniest mosses to mountain-like trees, a complete and complex ecosystem was forming. Animals also appeared, occupying their respective ecological niches. Second, it was an orderly, phased creation. Flowers and birdsong, these more delicate and aesthetically pleasing forms of life, were still awaiting their time. This implies that Yavanna's creation was not instantaneous, but a gradual, deliberate process. Finally, the direct link between light and life is re-emphasized. In the center of Middle-earth, where the Isle of Almaren was located, life was most abundant because the light of the two lamps was most concentrated there. During this long spring, the Valar often walked through the world they had shaped, marveling at the beauty of Yavanna's creations. Orome would ride his great steed Nahar through the vast forests, while Tolkas, with his strength, ensured the world's peace. However, this near-perfect peace also caused the Valar to lower their guard. Content with their achievements, they believed the threat of Melkor was distant. They did not realize that in the shadows of the far north, a new and more profound malice was quietly gathering, preparing to drag this flourishing spring into a harsh winter. When this spring ended, Yavanna was forced to place many of the creatures she had made in Middle-earth into a magical slumber, the sleep of Yavanna, to protect them from the encroaching darkness, awaiting a distant, new age of light. The spring of Arda, this idyllic period of communion between the Valar and the world, was not an invention unique to Tolkien, but his profound reshaping of an ancient and powerful human archetype, the Golden Age. By comparing it to the accounts of the Greek poet Hesiod and the mythological archetype of the Garden of Eden, we can uncover the complex philosophical and psychological implications behind this seemingly perfect paradise. In his epic poem, Works and Days, Hesiod described 5 ages of mankind, the first of which was the Golden Age. It was a time ruled by the Titan Cronus, when people lived like gods without sorrow of heart. The earth provided for them without toil. They did not age, and they died as if falling into a peaceful sleep. The spring of Arda is strikingly similar. The Valar lived on the Isle of Almaren, and they were long content. The world was bounteous, life flourished, and there was no shadow of decay or death. This effortless abundance, eternal peace and and coexistence with divine beings, the Valar, clearly echo the Golden Age described by Hesiod. In this way, Tolkien rooted his creation myth in the oldest literary traditions of the West, giving it a universality and resonance that transcends personal imagination. However, the interpretation of this paradise can go deeper into the realm of psychology. From the perspective of depth psychologists like Carl Jung, the Garden of Eden archetype is not just a lost paradise, but symbolizes the initial stage of human consciousness, a pre-conscious, undifferentiated state of unity. In this stage, there are no clear boundaries between the individual, Adam and Eve, and nature, or between the individual and the divine source, God. They exist in a state of participation mystique. The spring of Arda, especially its changeless day, is a perfect symbol of this undifferentiated state. There are no opposites, no alternation of light and dark, no cycle of life and death, no conflict between good and evil. Everything is constant, unified, and harmonious. The contentment of the Valar thus takes on a dual meaning. On one hand, it is the creator's appreciation for a perfect work. On the other, it also suggests a near stagnant state, lacking intention, a hidden complacency. They were immersed in the order they had created, yet blind to the chaos brewing outside of it. This state can be understood as an untested virtue. The goodness and peace of the Valar existed in the absence of a true adversary. Their happiness was one of innocence, stemming from an ignorance of the true depth and resilience of evil. This internal tension is subtly reflected in the relationship between the couple Aule and Yavanna. Aule is the craftsman, representing the industrial or civilizing impulse to reshape and utilize nature. Yavanna is the guardian of all living things, representing the impulse to protect and sustain nature. In the spring of Arda, their collaboration produced glorious results. Aule's lamps illuminated Yavanna's plants. But a potential conflict was already sown. The dwarves, whom Aule would later create, have little love for the things that Yavanna holds dear, for they would fell trees for their own craft. This reveals that even in the most perfect paradise, the conflict between creation and consumption, between utilization and preservation, is eternal. It suggests that this golden age was not an ultimate state devoid of internal contradictions, but merely a temporary, fragile balance. Therefore, the destruction of the spring of Arda was not just an external tragedy. It was the inevitable fate that this untested paradise had to face. This destruction ended the age of innocence for the Valar, forcing them to move from passive contentment to active, sacrificial struggle. It pushed them from a static mythological scene into a dynamic history filled with pain, choice, and heroism. The loss of the Golden Age is the necessary price of conscious growth, the beginning of the journey of individuation, for the Valar as well as for the later elves and men. Only after losing that perfect and simple world could a more complex, profound, and tragically beautiful world be born. While the Valar enjoyed the satisfaction of their creation in the eternal day of Almaren, a dark undercurrent was gathering at the world's edge. Melkor, the Vala temporarily exiled by the might of Tulkas, had not truly gone far. He lurked in the outer darkness, keeping abreast of all changes in Arda through his secret spies among the Valar, those lesser divine spirits, the Maiar, whom he had corrupted to his service. Ancient lore reveals his inner motivation, a burning fire of jealousy and possessiveness. And Melkor knew of all that was done. For even then, he had secret friends and spies among the Maiar whom he had converted to his cause. And in the darkness of the outer world, he was filled with hatred, being jealous of the work of his peers, and he desired to make it his own. Melkor's nature had similarities to Aule's. Both desired to create. But all his creativity stemmed from a love for Ilúvatar and a desire to share, whereas Melkor's creative urge had been twisted into a lust for power and a hatred for the achievements of others. He could not create new life of his own, only twist and corrupt what already existed, thereby mocking the creations of others. The harmony and beauty established by the Valar were, in his eyes, a challenge to his authority, a sight he could not tolerate. Thus, he gathered those fallen spirits who followed him and secretly returned to Middle-earth. The location he chose for his stronghold was highly strategic, in the far north, where the mountains were later known as the Iron Mountains, Eredengrin, and where the light of the northern lamp, Illuin, had grown faint and cold. Beneath this gloomy land, Melkor began one of his most wicked works, the delving of his first great fortress, Utumno, which means the deep. Utumno was a vast and terrifying underground fortress, its tunnels and dungeons bottomless, like a festering sore upon the earth. It became the headquarters for all of Melkor's evil forces. Here he gathered countless evil spirits, specters, and demons, and began his foulest creations. By twisting and corrupting life, he brought forth all manner of terrible monsters. The trolls of later ages, and his most pitiable creations, the orcs, were said to have first been bred in the dark pits of Utumno. This place became the absolute opposite of Almarin. One was a bright, terrestrial, harmonious world axis. The other was a dark, subterranean, chaotic source of evil. Although the Valar were initially unaware, the evil of Utumno, like an invisible poison, began to spread from the north of Middle-earth, gradually eroding the perfection of the spring of Arda. This corruption was not a sudden war, but a slow and deadly withering. The process of this decay is described in shocking detail. And the green things sickened and rotted, and the rivers were choked with weeds and slime, and fens were made, rank and poisonous, the breeding place of flies, and the forests grew dark and dangerous, the haunts of fear, and beasts became monsters of horn and ivory, and dyed the earth with blood. Then the Valar knew indeed that Melkor was at work again, and they sought for his hiding place. This scene vividly illustrates the nature of Melkor's evil. It is not merely destruction, but marring. He infused his malice into the very substance of Arda, making life itself diseased and twisted. The harmonious laws of nature were subverted. Rivers were no longer clear, forests were no longer safe, and animals began to slaughter each other cruelly. It was a method of dismantling order from within. By the time the Valar were finally roused from their comfort, realizing that the sickness spreading across the world stemmed from the return of their old enemy, the golden age of the spring of Arda was already at an end. They began to search for Melkor's lair, but it was too late. Melkor had already gathered enough strength to launch a decisive strike aimed at utterly destroying the Valar's original design. The peace of the world was shattered, replaced by a growing fear and unease. That age of hope and wonder had unwittingly slipped to the brink of the abyss. As the Valar became aware of the threat and began to search for its source, Melkor launched his attack. It was sudden and devastating, aimed directly at the two pillars that supported the world's order and light. He led all the dark forces of Utumno, sweeping down from the north with a power far greater than the Valar had anticipated. He first attacked the northern pillar of Helkar, destroying it at its foundations. The great stone pillar collapsed, and the lamp of Illuin that stood upon it fell. He then destroyed the southern pillar of Ringil and the lamp of Ormal in the same manner. The consequences of this destruction were global and catastrophic. The ancient texts record this cataclysm with an almost geological precision. In the overthrow of the mighty pillars, lands were broken and seas arose in tumult. And when the lamps were spilled, destroying flame was poured out over the earth. And the shape of Arda and the symmetry of its waters and its lands was marred in that time, so that the first designs of the Valar were never after restored. The destruction of the two lamps was more than just the loss of a light source. The sacred energy contained within the lamps was unleashed in their breaking, turning into an all-consuming fire that swept across the land. The fall of the pillars triggered violent earthquakes, causing the fracture and drift of continental plates. The once whole and unified Middle-earth was torn apart, forming the different continents known in later ages. Great oceans, like the Beligare in the west, were formed in this geological upheaval. separating the Valar's future home of Aman from Middle-earth. Where Illuin once stood, a great inland sea was formed, the Sea of Helkar. And where Ormal fell, the southern sea of Ringil was also formed. The world's original perfect symmetry was utterly shattered, replaced by a broken, scarred, and geographically complex Arda. In the midst of this cataclysmic chaos, the Valar were overwhelmed, struggling to contain the rampant fires and raging floods, and had no time to pursue the culprit. Melkor seized the opportunity to flee back to his mighty fortress of Utumno, hiding in its dark depths. The Valar knew that to drag him out of Utumno would require a more terrible war, which would inflict even greater damage on the already broken world. They were unwilling to take this risk, as they did not yet know when or where the children of Ilúvatar were to awaken. Thus the Valar made a sorrowful decision. They abandoned Middle-earth and retreated to the far west, where they established their new kingdom, Valinor. Middle-earth, meanwhile, fell into a long darkness, lit only by the starlight Varda had made long before. The spring of Arda was over, and an age known as the Great Darkness, or the Sleep of Yavanna, began. Melkor's return and his destruction of the two lamps is the first true turning point in Tolkien's mythology. The significance of this event can be analyzed through two powerful human intellectual archetypes: the Luciferian fall and the philosophical concept of creative destruction. First, Melkor's actions perfectly embody the Luciferian archetype. In many mythological and religious traditions, Lucifer, or a similar figure, is the noblest and most powerful of the highest angels who, due to pride, jealousy, and a desire to create, rebels against the divine order. Melkor is precisely this. He was the one among the Ainur gifted with the most talents, possessing a share of the abilities of all his peers. However, unlike the other Valar who were content to create within the themes set by Ilúvatar, he longed to create things entirely of his own, not originating from the thought of the One. This pride eventually evolved into jealousy and a desire to destroy the creations of others. His evil is not an independent existence, but a parasitic distortion of the good. He cannot create from nothing, only mar and mock the works of the Valar, twisting life into monsters and harmony into chaos. He poured his power and malice into the very substance of Arda, making it Arda Mard, which is the ultimate manifestation of the Luciferian fall. Not only falling himself, but dragging the entire created world down with him. However, if we view this event merely as pure destruction, we might miss its deeper, paradoxical meaning. Here we can introduce the concept of creative destruction, proposed by economist Joseph Schumpeter. Schumpeter used this term to describe the process. In capitalist economies, where new innovations drive development by destroying old technologies, industries, and models, the process is painful and chaotic, but necessary for progress. Destruction clears the way for creation. Although Melkor's motive was pure evil, his actions objectively served the role of creative destruction. What kind of world did he destroy? A changeless day, a static, perfect, but also potentially stagnant paradise. This centrally planned utopia, meticulously designed by the Valar, while beautiful, lacked the internal resilience to cope with a crisis. Melkor's devastating blow, though it brought immense pain and loss, also brought a definitive end to this fragile first version of the world. The catastrophe forced the Valar to abandon their initial, overly idealistic design. They no longer tried to rebuild a global, unified system of light. Instead, they retreated to a corner of the world and created the two trees of Valinor. The light of the trees was no longer constant, but rhythmically alternating, a living cycle, which in itself represented a more complex and mature worldview, one that embraced change, opposition, and dynamic balance. This perfectly validates Ilúvatar's proclamation at the beginning of creation. And thou, Melkor, shalt see that no theme may be played that hath not its uttermost source in me, nor can any alter the music in my despite. For he that attempteth this shall prove but mine instrument in the devising of things more wonderful, which he himself hath not imagined. Melkor's discord was ultimately woven into a grander music. The destruction of the two lamps was a heavy but necessary chord in this magnificent symphony. It transformed the creation myth from a static story about gods shaping a world into a dynamic epic about elves and men struggling, striving, and making history in a broken world. This cataclysm marked the end of a top-down era wholly dominated by the divine, and the beginning of a bottom-up history written by mortal or semi-mortal beings. The Valar's perfect plan failed, but this very failure created the stage for countless acts of heroism, tragedy, and moral choice in the ages to come. A perfect world may have no stories to tell, but a marred and broken world is filled with endless possibilities. This is perhaps one of the most profound insights of Tolkien's cosmology. True beauty and meaning are often not born from an unlost perfection, but from the resilience, hope, and love that arise from the ruins. Now, the first great era of the story comes to a close. Those two great lamps, like miniature suns, along with the symmetrical and perfect world they supported, have turned to naught. The Isle of Almurin, that green paradise, has sunk beneath the furious seas born of the world's upheaval. The Valar, with endless sorrow and weariness, journeyed west to find a new refuge, a sanctuary that could withstand the encroachment of darkness. Behind them, the vast continent of Middle-earth fell silent. The creations of Yavanna, the great trees and beasts that once thrived in the eternal day, were now put under her spell of slumber, waiting quietly for a dawn that no one knew when would come. The world fell into a deep twilight, lit only by the stars, a twilight that would last for countless millennia. In this long, silent darkness, ancient and powerful creatures still prowled the deep valleys, and more terrifyingly, deep beneath the earth in the far north, the evil of Utumno was growing and spreading, like a tumor biding its time. The old light was extinguished. The new light was not yet born, and the world was in a long and uncertain interlude.